invited the experts, and we're recording. We've invited the experts and a special guest to share the details about the policy. For those of you who did your homework when I sent out the resolutions, thank you for that. If you have questions about this policy, please use this time at the beginning. After they've made their presentation, use this program time to ask those questions so that you're ready to vote later on in the agenda. We do have a big agenda planned, so I'll call the meeting to order around 6:45. But first, I'm going to let our first Vice Chair, Rachel Glass, make the introductions. Rachel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our pre-meeting program tonight, where we're going to be talking about the National Infrastructure Bank. It's a very informative program with a lot of really expert minds who are going to be presenting the information. We have a really special guest in our midst, a VIP, Senator Bob Hasegawa, who's going to give a few words about this topic before we get started with the presenters. Senator Hasegawa is a lifelong resident of the 11th Legislative District, which he was elected to represent in 2005, first in the House and since 2012 in the Senate. Bob is a longtime labor activist and social justice champion. He's been a member of the Teamsters Union for 32 years, the elected leader of Teamsters Local 174 for 3 terms, 9 years, and also a leader in the National Teamsters Pro-Union Democracy Reform Movement, Teamsters for a Democratic Union. As a union and community organizer, Bob has long sought to build bridges between labor and social justice organizations, particularly those serving working families, BIPOC, and disenfranchised communities. In the legislature, the state bank has become his top legislative priority, and I'm going to let him tell you why. He has introduced a state bank bill to the Washington State Legislature every biennium since 2010. Meanwhile, becoming a nationally recognized leader on the issue. 34th and guests, please welcome with a big wave, Senator Bob Hasegawa.
Thanks, Rachel. You're too gracious. Thanks for having me, 34th LD Dems. I really appreciate my association with you all over the past years. This whole concept of a national infrastructure bank is so long overdue. I think you've often heard the measurement that the American Society of Civil Engineers gives to our infrastructure standing. And the state of Washington, we actually upticked, I think, a half a point from a D to a D+. But nationally, we're somewhere still around a D. Even here in the 11th Legislative District, the main bridge going to the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad Pacific Puget Sound Intermodal Hub, that bridge is rated at a 7 and close to failure, which is crucial to our local economy, 7 being measured out of a scale of 100. So we just do not have the resources to maintain our current infrastructure, let alone think about having the resources to build the kind of infrastructure that will be foundational to our future economic development. And we're competing, although I would prefer we'd be cooperating with the rest of the world, but we're under current conditions competing. And so I guess you can see in my background here, my crew of advisors, and they live in a world where there are adequate resources to become the best that we can each be. But until we get to that point, I think a national infrastructure bank is probably the only way that we can have enough resources so that we can fully develop to our potential. So I'm really curious to hear more from the experts who have agreed to participate with us right now. Our state bank effort, while it is ongoing, we still have work to do to cross the finish line. I think we may even be closer in getting a national infrastructure bank before we get our state bank. I'm hoping that's not the case, but I'm excited that the National Infrastructure Bank can actually maybe a capitalization option for our local state bank. And that alone is reason enough to support it. So for me, it's like a no-brainer. We need to recapture control of our tax dollars, recapture it from Wall Street profiteers, so that we taxpayers can reinvest it into our local communities. So I really appreciate the 34th LD's consideration of this and looking at passing a resolution tonight, hopefully. And I would suggest that you spread it to the other local LDs as well and say, hey, this is something maybe you might want to look at jumping on board with. So without further ado, I'll just leave it at that and turn it back over to Rachel. And thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. I'm going to now introduce our two expert speakers who have been so gracious to join us this evening and give us the scoop. Julie Olson is a small business owner in Alaska, Washington, and Idaho, and spends part of every month in Washington. She resides in Anchorage and is the chair of the Alaska Progressive Caucus and was a Sanders delegate to the 2020 Democratic Convention. She has a BA in economics and an MBA. She has participated in numerous meetings with state elected officials and congressional offices in the Northwest regarding the National Infrastructure Bank. She was directly involved in getting the Alaska Senate to introduce a resolution of support sponsored by the Senate Minority Leader, Tom Begich, and she testified in hearings in the Alaska Senate. Alpheka Mutardi is a professional macroeconomist. She was a senior economist with the International Monetary Fund for 25 years. She was the lead architect in drafting HR 3339, the National Infrastructure Bank Act. She has testified in many legislative hearings from New Mexico to Nevada to Pennsylvania. She is also the author of numerous authoritative reports on the NIB and publishes a monthly economic newsletter with a broad national readership. Ladies and gentlemen of the 34th, please welcome Alpheka Mutardi and Julie Olson.
Julie, you're on mute. Would you like to go first?
I don't care. You can go first if you want.
Okay. It might make sense for me to explain to you how the bank works, and then Julie can pick up and tell you a lot about what that's going to do for Washington State and how it can help businesses and so forth in your area. I have a few slides to show you. It makes the explanation of the bank a little bit easier, if that's okay. We're here to talk to you today about this bill in Congress that was just mentioned. It's HR 3339. And what this piece of legislation would do would be to create a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country. And of course, the reason that we need such a public bank is we have not been able to finance our infrastructure through the federal budget or through state and local budgets. And as a result, our infrastructure spending has fallen way off as a percent of the size of our economy. This bill was introduced last session by Rep. Danny Davis with some Democratic co-sponsors and just recently reintroduced into this session. We're looking for both Democratic and Republican congressional co-sponsors and also some senators to introduce it into the Senate, because in today's discussion, we think that this is a really good fit for today's discussion on how we're going to finance infrastructure. Actually, this idea of a public bank to finance infrastructure, a national public bank, is not a new one. We've had 4 really large public banks that have financed most of our nation's infrastructure in the past, starting right after after the American Revolution, and then ending with FDR's Reconstruction Finance Corporation in the Great Depression. And these 4 banks were supported by 6 American presidents, 3 of them Democrat, 3 of them Republican. And as I said, they built most of our nation's infrastructure. This is a kind of an explanation of how the bank works. The legislation calls for setting up this institution more or less like a commercial bank. It's a public bank and it lends only for infrastructure, but it does operate more or less like a commercial bank. So it takes in deposits and then gives out loans for infrastructure. As I said, we want to have this bank finance at least $5 trillion worth of loans. So to create such a bank, the first thing we need to do is to capitalize the bank. And we need a ratio of $1 in capital to $10 in loans, which means we need to capitalize up to $500 billion. And we're going to use the same technique that Alexander Hamilton first invented with the first Bank of the United States. Go to the private sector and ask them, would they like to sell into the NIB their treasuries, which they're holding for long-term savings purposes, in exchange for an equivalent of preferred stock in the bank. Preferred stock would make these private investors silent partners. And in exchange for that, they would get an extra 2% return on their investment compared to what they were earning on their treasuries. That 2% of 500 billion is a stream of 10 billion a year, and that would come out of the interest earnings from the loans. So the beauty of this bank is we'll be able to finance all of the infrastructure financing gap without making any net calls on the federal budget. So it won't need any appropriations or significant, other than a little tiny bit to get the bank the doors open, but no significant appropriations, no new taxes would be needed, and it would not create any debt or deficits. And meanwhile, it'll be able to finance all of our country's infrastructure. This is how this capital, by the way, people ask this question, sort of sits on the books of the NIB and acts like a cushion in case the economy goes bad or any of the loans go bad, and then they can use the capital to top up non-performing loans. This explains how the bank provides loans, and the operation works just like a commercial bank. It takes in deposits, gives out loans, and anytime you go into a commercial bank for a loan, it works in exactly the same way. What the bank does as part of its accounting operations is puts the loan up on one side of its books and then creates a deposit on the other side of its books of the same amount. Whenever you create a deposit like that, you're actually creating money. That's the first order of where the money comes from. And then through the fractional reserve banking and the checks clearing in and out of the NIB to other parts of the banking system, there's another flow, a secondary flow of money that goes around. This is the repayment process right here. It works exactly the same way as a commercial bank, principal and interest. The novel thing, however, is that this bank, because it's a public bank, will charge only the treasury bond rate or an equivalent in interest, and that will keep financing costs for these borrowers down to a bare minimum and would be very competitive with municipal bonds, which is another source of financing for state and local governments. The borrowers would be state and local governments because they own 90% of the nation's infrastructure. What we know is that for every dollar they would borrow for a project, that will plow back $3 to $7 back into the economy. You can imagine spending $5 trillion on infrastructure projects and putting money into workers' pockets with family sustaining wages being paid. Buy America Only for all the inputs into the construction will really stimulate the American economy. We think we can get growth rates with this level of spending up to the 5% level. And to compare the most recent period before COVID, we were only averaging 1.8%, which is really anemic, low rate of growth. We had 5% growth rates the last time we had an infrastructure bank, and economic models show that we can get it up that high again. With higher growth, of course, you have much more tax receipts coming into the federal budget. That'll actually lower our total stock of debt as a percent of GDP, and into state and local governments, which combined with user fees will allow them to fully repay back all of the loans. This is a list of the projects that this bank will cover. The aim was to cover all of the financing gap that was identified by the American Society of Civil Engineers in their 2021 report card. They cover 17 different categories of infrastructure: roads, bridges, transit, the usual hard infrastructure. What they estimated is that there is a financing gap of $2.6 trillion over the next 10 years that is not covered by the federal budget or state and local budgets. Some whopping big numbers in here in this gap: 1.2 trillion for surface transportation, and 1.1 trillion for water infrastructure, including all of the lead line pipes and broken service lines and stormwater overflows and that kind of thing. Plus, we really need to harden our electric grid and make it more resilient. Those kinds of things would be covered by this infrastructure bank. In addition, we added a few categories of our own. We put in 7 million affordable housing units across the country. We've dedicated or earmarked at least $1 trillion for a full high-speed rail network all across the country. And of course, broadband everywhere. If this is not enough money for the broadband, the bank will find more to cover all of the broadband. And then some large water redistribution projects to address drought in agricultural areas in the country. So just to give you a comparison, many of you may know that the Senate bipartisan plan is the one that's sort of coming to the top of negotiations with the Biden administration over infrastructure projects that they would cost. And I just wanted to let you know how it compares with this NIB proposal. So that Senate bipartisan plan is only good for about $580 billion of new spending over the next 5-year period. After that, it'll have to be renegotiated again. And it does provide a little bit more money, a little bit more new money for roads and bridges. Still not enough, however, to cover the full gap. And then all the other projects are not meeting what the American Society of Civil Engineers say is the full gap. Especially in water infrastructure, way too small of a number to cover all of our water needs, and even less for the electric grid. And then they've cut down a little bit on the spending for the broadband. So whatever plan the Biden administration is able to finally negotiate, both through the normal reauthorization process or through this bipartisan plan to add on new spending, it still will not be enough. And the beauty of this NIB proposal is that whatever they do manage to fit through the budget and find funding for, this plan will come and top up the rest and complement the whatever plan is agreed to. I wanted to give you kind of like a real quick thumbnail of what it would provide for Washington State. Based on your population, out of the 5 trillion, the state could qualify for up to 91 billion in infrastructure projects over a 10-year period. This would cover all of your financing gap, whatever projects you have not been able to get paid for through either federal spending, grant money, or through your local, state and local budgets. This bank will cover all of that. And I think Senator Chase, Marilyn Chase, has identified the list of projects that are still pending and not covered in your state. And then it will create up to 460,000 new family-sustaining jobs in your state as well. It will include big ticket items like your Portland, Oregon high-speed rail. This proposal has been endorsed by the Cascadia High-Speed Rail Alliance in your area to move high-speed rail all the way from Eugene all the way up to into Canada, which has been asked for by, of course, many of your large tech companies and those kind of folks have called for high-speed rail. And then in addition, full replacement of Seattle's aging bridges. I think the estimate for that alone is just 6.3 trillion. And then direct financing for all of your infrastructure projects not covered so far: schools, local roads, stormwater, so forth. Affordable housing. I think Senator Cantwell was just on the news last week saying that we must have more affordable housing. And this project will provide 7 million units all across the country. And then it will also, of course, train workers. They'll be able to earn and learn at the same time and improve the state finances through higher economic growth in order to repay back the loans. So that's about it for me. I'm going to turn it over now to Julie, and she's going to tell you what this will do for businesses and why this is a good conservative plan for financing infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having us. I was actually the chair of my House district for about 4 years, so I know how hard it is to get everybody organized and keep them engaged. So really appreciate you doing this. what I wanted to talk about, first of all, is people hear the presentation, they say, this sounds great, 26 million new jobs, high-paying jobs, infrastructure, et cetera. Well, what could be wrong with this proposal and who would object? And so here are some of the things that we hear. Well, it's too big. A $5 trillion bank is too big. It would be the biggest bank in the country. However, we have a huge infrastructure problem. In fact, some analysts believe our infrastructure needs are more along the lines of $7 trillion to $8 trillion. So is it a big number? Yes, it's a big number, but we face a huge infrastructure problem in our country. The next objection people come up with is that it competes with, or it might compete with, commercial banks. And that is true. In some cases it might. However, there is the opportunity for the infrastructure bank to cooperate with local banking groups and provide some sorts of guarantees or to partner in on projects. So it's certainly not the goal to cut out some of those too big to fail banks, but to encourage them to get involved in the local communities and to actually lend money for these projects. Another objection may come from the small government folks who say, well, yes, it's a good idea, but this just creates more government. And we would argue that infrastructure is the appropriate place for government to be. After all, this is providing a common good, and that is the goal and the objective of government, is to take care of those items that individuals or the private sector cannot accomplish. And then the final objection is that injecting all that additional money into the economy may contribute to inflation. However, there are plenty of studies that show that it would not contribute to inflation. And certainly the creation of all of these good paying jobs is going to help the middle class and help those people who need additional training in the technical trades and vocational trades to be able to participate in the construction and design of all these projects. I do want to say that our group has a financial subcommittee that is working on the modeling for this particular bank. And that would look at the period of time that we would do the capitalization, what our expenses would be, what the liquidity needs are, the number and amount of loans that we would be able to give out over the first 5 years, the first 10 years, et cetera. And so I do want to remind everybody that this is a long-term solution to a long-term problem that's been building in our country. This is not something where day one you open the doors and presto, we're going to have $5 trillion to lend. So that's not how this would work. So again, I want people to think that this is a long-term solution to this problem. And it's also important to think that infrastructure projects are typically long-term. They go through design phases, EIS statements, construction, right-of-way acquisition, et cetera. So, you know, this is not something where, as I said, the first week you open the doors, people are banging on the door to get loans. Although certainly there are shovel-ready projects out there that need the funding. And so again, a long-term solution to a long-term problem. Senator made the point about global competitiveness, and I think that is extremely important. Other countries around the world, Canada, China, there's an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They've been using these kinds of banks for years to make the investments in their roads, their rails, their ports that help make their manufacturing more efficient and less expensive than manufacturing in America. And so one of our desired states would be to see those improvements made in our infrastructure that would lead to onshoring of manufacturing back in this country. And I think that's going to help America be safe. We need to have a manufacturing base in this country. I think it's, kind of interesting, but one of the things I like to talk about is the private development that goes along with infrastructure. And what I use in a lot of calls is the example of the light rail line in Seattle. And for anybody who takes that light rail line from Seattle to downtown, on virtually every stop along that line, you will see private development, right? Apartment buildings, commercial buildings, revitalized restaurants, coffee shops, et cetera. So private development is thriving along that investment in infrastructure there with the light rail in Seattle. And that's what we envision happening across the country through these investments in infrastructure. Alfecca touched on it a little bit, that there are multiple bills out there, infrastructure bills, and it's important to make sure that we have a bill that we're supporting that is going to truly address the problem. Other experts out there have estimated that the maintenance needs alone for our infrastructure in our country are $150 to $200 billion a year. So this other infrastructure bank proposal that's looking at $500 billion, that would only cover the maintenance needs for our existing infrastructure for 2.5 years. So clearly it's not enough to address the problem. Our bill also, I do want to point out, does not have a sunset clause, so it would establish the bank. The bank could operate in perpetuity or until Congress decided it's not meeting our needs or is not doing what we want, and then would be able to essentially sunset it and shut that entity down. And then I want to say, out in Eastern Washington, we have a huge need for affordable housing. And I know Seattle's had this issue for a while, but this is something that is plaguing our entire state. Wenatchee is extremely expensive for workers to live there. And so it's very difficult if you're in business to find people who can afford to live in Wenatchee. Eastern Washington and Spokane has a huge housing crisis with so many homeless people. It's terrible, and we don't have the ability to deal with it. In Spokane, we hear these stories about how places like Moses Lake are buying people bus tickets and sending them to Spokane to deposit them in Spokane, because at least we have shelters and we have places where they can get meals and clothing and such. But again, we need that investment in affordable housing in Spokane. So Seattle is not the only part of the state where that's an issue. And so certainly the affordable housing portion of our bill, we think is extremely important. And that's not something that is in the infrastructure bill that's being talked about in Congress right now, the investments in infrastructure. And then finally, I want to say that here in Alaska, we were able to get the Alaska Democrat State Central Committee to approve the resolution. And so we went out to the members of the State Central Committee beforehand, before the meeting. We did some education. We did a webinar for those people. And I want to say that we had overwhelming support. I want to say there was one person that I know of that voted against endorsing the resolution. But other than that, we had overwhelming support for the resolution. And I would really urge this district to encourage the Washington Democrats to support this resolution. And so with that, I think we should open it up for questions.
We've got a few questions I'm happy to ask. Senator Hasegawa, did you have a question you wanted to direct to our speakers today?
Oh, thanks. I would yield time to your actual 34th LD members.
Okay.
I don't want to take their time away from them, but if you could send me Alfecca's contact information, maybe I can talk directly with her.
That would be great. Alfecca, if you would like to put that into the chat for everybody, that'll be just great. There are a few questions from the members. One of our members has asked, would it be good to have the feds invest their dollars in the NIB to fully finance the bank?
I guess I could take that question. The Fed is got its hands full right now. It's been propping up the stock market. For those of you who don't know what they've been up to, I really highly recommend seeing the Frontline that just came out yesterday or the day before. That was about a year-long study on what the Fed is doing. But suffice it to say that their main mandate is to protect the value of the US dollar and prevent inflation. And they've been propping up the stock market since 2008, and their hands are really quite tied. Their mandate really has never been to lend for private projects or infrastructure projects or anything like that. Their main function is to lend or provide liquidity for banks. And so it's not really a good fit. and also during.
Can I clarify? That was my question. And what I meant was using the infrastructure dollars that the federal government, not the feds, I used the wrong term.
Oh,
If they use those dollars that are insufficient for everything else to fund the bank, then you'd be totally fully capitalized and you could begin lending. That's where I was coming from. Sorry.
okay. So let me start again. We see in today's budgetary world that there's not a lot of appetite for providing too much for infrastructure or for infrastructure financing authorities out of the budget. And the beauty of this bank is that we can finance all of the gap without making a net call on the budget. The proposal of the Senate bipartisan will need $20 billion to finance an infrastructure financing authority. And even that financing authority has met with big objections because a lot of proponents fear that it may wind up privatizing things like water utilities or putting on a lot of toll roads or things like that. That's the way that kind of a bank works. Our bank is much more flexible and will keep public infrastructure in public hands and lend under much more relaxed lending terms than any of the other proposals that we've seen so far, and will cover the full financing gap. So we want the budget to go ahead and find money and provide infrastructure financing that they have done before, to reauthorize and to give states grant money, because grant money doesn't have to be repaid. So that should be the first priority, to get that money to states for their infrastructure, but it's not enough. So the reality is, if we want to really cover all of our infrastructure, if we want to really attack these bridges that are ready to fall down, take this lead out of the water, build affordable housing, do any of these kinds of build a high-speed rail. There've been lots and lots of calls for building high-speed rail through the budget. And simply the fact is, you're not going to be able to find the financing in the budget for that big of an investment project, but this bank can cover them.
Great. We do have another question. As a complement to the Biden plan, how would the NIB further decarbonization of our economy? Would loans from the NIB be contingent upon meeting environmental standards and sustainable practices?
I'll be happy to answer that. I would say no, not necessarily. They wouldn't be contingent upon it. However, we have discussed the ability to be able to provide financing for green types of projects, and to be able to provide more attractive financing for projects that would be able to prove that they are contributing to decarbonization and energy efficiency and such. So one of the other benefits of the National Infrastructure Bank is that it gives local control. So if a local entity or area believes strongly that they should invest in a certain project because of its green characteristics, then they would be able to move forward with that and pursue financing. And so we believe it would be easier to finance those green projects through an infrastructure bank than trying to get a grant included in an infrastructure bill, where you may have to fight various other parties who may not be so concerned about investing in decarbonization or green types of projects. So we believe it would be hugely beneficial to environmental sorts of projects.
Great. One of our members has asked, who introduced HR 3339 in the House and on what date?
That was on Representative Danny Davis out of Illinois, and I don't know what date, but it was recently. Alphecca, do you know, a month ago, maybe?
In May.
In May, okay, a couple months.
And that was of this year?
Yes, it was introduced last year also under a different bill number. So it's been kicking around for what, three or 4 years?
No, not that long. It was only first introduced last year, so it's only been a bill in existence for about 13 months.
Okay.
Another question, is it anticipated that an NIB would replace or displace municipal bond funding for infrastructure?
Well, Well, we see that there being a great complement. The state and local governments already have borrowed through municipal bonds about $4 trillion. Their stock of outstanding debt through municipal bonds is about $4 trillion. So we anticipate that state and locals would continue to do their ongoing projects by this means, but that simply has not been enough to finance the whole job either. One thing that's an advantage of this bank is that instead of giving loans in a silo fashion, this loan for a road and this loan for a water utility, we can bundle projects together, and we can even complement them or guarantee or co-finance with municipal bonds or with any other financing need, and bundle projects so that we can fix all of the utilities underneath the road at the same time that we fix the road, and that we're not digging up the road several times, which will save on construction costs and save any local entity money on the construction area. And don't forget that for every local entity who has a budget and is trying to service its debt and consider whether it should take on an infrastructure project, even an infrastructure project right next door will benefit that locality economic wise, because the installation, for example, of high-speed rail will, as Julie's just explained, will bring more business development, and that will bring more taxes going into the local coffers. So the whole thing is one big economic and infrastructure development plan.
I'd also like to make a couple additional comments, which is that having the NIB enter into this particular marketplace with doing loans instead of municipal bonds would probably make the municipal bond market more competitive. And by that, I mean more streamlined, lower their excessive fees to municipalities. And so certainly municipalities would be able to go out and look at the bond market, the private bond market, and then look at the National Infrastructure Bank to see where they were able to get the rates and the terms and conditions that are going to allow them to most effectively and most efficiently do those projects. The other thing is that there are some small entities like small water districts and small fire districts and that sort of thing. Certainly in Washington, we have lots of small school districts, water districts, et cetera, that may not have the expertise to be able to go to the bond market on their own. And so this might very well be a much easier process for them to follow. It's anticipated that the NIB would have staff experts in the various fields, sewer, water, fire, dams, ports, roads, et cetera, so that we would be able to help smaller municipalities and entities with their projects to make sure that they're designed efficiently. I know, for example, there's a discussion, I think we had this with the folks in West Virginia about a common sewage plant that, why should you redesign the sewage plant for 100 different sewer districts, right? You might as well take one master design and then be able to utilize that at as many places as you can, again, to be efficient and reduce your overall costs for improving that infrastructure.
I had one more quick question. I mean, this is from a member as well, but I'm wanting to make sure that we put this in, and it kind of piggybacks on what you were talking about with the bonds. Could citizens invest, such as like the prototype of the war bonds during the 40s? Is that something that could happen for this?
Yes, one of the sources of the bank will need cash to do its loan operations. So it'll either bring that cash in as deposits or it can issue bonds. And the hope was that we would do something like a Build America Activity Bond, which would have interest savings cost, tax savings on the interest earnings from the bonds. But the NIB will issue NIB bonds, which will be building infrastructure, and anybody can invest in those bonds.
And the other thought was to have a green bond fund within the NIB so that people could feel confident that if they invested their money in our green bond fund, those monies would be dedicated to green types of projects or projects that demonstrated energy efficiencies and so on and so forth.
Great. Well, it looks like we are just about at 6:45, and I apologize. There may have been some other questions that we just weren't able to get to. However, I would like to just remind you all again that Julie and Alphecca, please feel free to put your contact information on the chat. Folks can just copy and paste that for tonight, but also we're going to have on our program hubs hub page all the information from tonight's presentation. So you can go to our website, the 34th LD Dems website, to our programs hub page, where you can get all the contact information, and you can contact our special guests directly, even after tonight's program. So I think, Carla, I'm gonna hand this back to you, but everybody, please join me again to thank our special guests, Julie, Alphecca, and also Senator Hasegawa, for being with us tonight for a really wonderful, informative program. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, wonderful. That was fabulous. Lots of great information there. Again, sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions, some really, really good questions, thoughtful questions. But I'm sure that, and I personally, before we did all of this, just went on their website. The website's got tons of great information on there. I did put that in the chat at the very beginning. If you want to go check that out to learn more. And of course, a little bit later on, we will be voting on the resolution. So, and thank you again.